Explore the harmony of health and holiness through a Catholic lens. Discover how faith rooted in tradition fosters vibrant living. This podcast rebroadcasts the weekly Becoming Gift segment on Morning Offering on Ave Maria Radio. You can check out the Physically Spiritual podcast from Awakened Catholic for my long-form discussions and presentations, or you can find my Substack at becominggift.com. This is your host, Andrew Reinhardt. Yeah, the topic for today, like you said, is proclaim Christ, not your diet. You know, 1 Corinthians 1:23 says, we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. You know, if you get into the health and wellness space, you're going to run into what are sometimes called the diet wars. Mm-hmm. You know, and you have equally passionate, equally smart, equally equipped people with scientific studies proclaiming things like everyone should never eat meat, and maybe the only thing you should eat is meat, and everything in between. So part of this, I think, is that man is religious by nature. So when true religion subsides, false religions will fill the vacuum. And for many people, you know, what they experience when they go on a diet is it works. You know, they lose weight, they feel better, they get healthier, so they get passionate about it. And oftentimes, I think in people's lives, when they don't have Christ, this passion about their health and wellness can take part of that place where God is meant to be in the human heart. Pope Eugene IV at the Council of Florence said this, thus it declares that the nature of no food which society admits is to be condemned, and no distinction is to be made by anyone at all, whether man or woman, between animals or by whatever kind of death they meet their end. Although for health of the body, for the exercise of virtue, for regular and ecclesiastical discipline, many things not denied should be given up, since according to the apostle all things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. You know, so what Pope Eugene is saying here is essentially, you know, you shouldn't condemn any kind of food or kind of place it on somebody else, the burden that they should eat a particular way. But you might choose a particular way of eating, and he says you might do this for your health, for growth and virtue, or for kind of a discipline, whether it be a rule of life that you have or just disciplining your own senses. And I think we should really take this to heart as Catholics.
Andrew, do you find, kind of like what you were saying, our faith gives us this connection to what it really means to be truly human. And I find it kind of amusing right now that everything is about intermittent fasting. I open up things on my, computer, and it's, do 16, do 18, do 20. And I'm thinking, and like this is all from a health thing. It's not from a religious thing. And yet, back in the time of Christ, this was fasting was an important thing. Every society and religion has recognized fasting as a part of a whole life, right? A big piece of the picture. And what often happens with our modern mentality is we'll get a couple results of a couple research studies, and then we proclaim it as if it's a new idea. We just figured it out. Fasting's good for you. Well, actually, we all knew this for about 6,000 years. Yeah. So, everything old is new again. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I say tongue in cheek is that the Eucharist isn't keto, paleo, vegan, or carnivore. Right? You got to eat some bread, and it's also flesh, by the way. Right? So it doesn't fit anyone's ideology. But one of the dynamics is that your body will always respond to better. What I mean by that is if you go from a bad diet to a better diet, you're going to get results. But this doesn't mean that your better diet's the best diet. You can't pull from your experience into the world of ideas. We in America suffer from what's sometimes called the standard American diet or the SAD diet. So it's high in calories and low in nutrients, full of processed foods that hack our hunger and satiety signaling and basically trick us to eat more than we need to. Right, because in a commodity-driven market, the more we eat, the more money people make. So in a market driven by profit motive, we should always be a bit skeptical of what's being sold us. We are the product to some extent. So every form of intentional eating works to some extent, and I think avoiding idealism is really helpful. So some principles to live by are, people say shop the outside of the grocery store. Now, this doesn't work for me because it's all great till you get to the freezer section. And my grocery store decided to plop the ice cream down on the edge of the grocery store out there. Right. I think as an effort to overcome this adage. But I think the principle here is that the majority of our diet should come from whole foods that are minimally processed. Essentially this. If you can't understand something on the label, maybe you shouldn't eat it. Another idea is to minimize sweet fat. And the idea here is that in nature, generally things are either savory or sweet. It's very rare that they're both. Maybe some nuts have a little bit of sweetness and savoriness together, but in the foods that our bodies have kind of adapted to eat by nature, it's very rare that you get something that's kind of sweet and salty at the same time. And these kind of foods actually, they kind of like send crazy signals in our brain, almost like a drug, that we just can't stop eating them. We can't get enough of them. And then the final principle is to be aware of your story and to be aware of other people's stories too. For me, a good intentional way of eating has always been to avoid carbohydrates. And there's nothing magical about that. It's just removing a food group helps you to eat less calories, right?
That's true.
And it works for me because I've always been the kind of guy that I'd rather have a second entree than a dessert. And I'm perfectly satisfied with 2 steaks as opposed to having a dessert and a piece of key lime pie.
Yeah, right.
Well, steak is a dessert, so.
But everyone's story is different. You might struggle with an eating disorder or body dysmorphia or something, right? So different kinds of eating might be actually dangerous for you, or maybe you're the kind of person that can't stand meat. Well, going carnivore probably isn't going to work, right? So the diet that works is better than the perfect diet that doesn't work. So our topic today is proclaim Christ, not your diet. Give your passion to the Lord. Give your heart to the Lord. Give to God what is God's. And certainly eat a healthy diet, eat in an intentional way, but be mindful that the way you eat might not be the way that everyone else should.
And you don't want to you don't want to confuse the idea or conflate the idea that being heavy is ungodly, right? As you said, some people have an issue with the way that the chemical makeup of their body works and other issues. It may not be overeating, though that part should be tackled. And then the idea that we can also, in the way that we eat, almost like our liturgical seasons, sometimes we're feasting, sometimes we're fasting. I mean, that's kind of what the Lord has called us to do in our lives as far as what we eat as well.
That's interesting. Some people are actually a proponent of seasonal eating. And the idea would be that, if we didn't have kind of sort of the supply chains that we had, you would eat the stuff that's there.
Right.
And there's only certain times of the year, depending on where you're at, that fruit might be available, or, certain animals that you would slaughter at a certain time of year, or, certain crops come in and come out. So that is an approach that some people take to eat locally and eat seasonally. And the idea of that is to try to mimic sort of what our ancestors might have done. And once again, I don't think there's any magic to it. One of our superpowers as humans is we can pretty much get by on about anything. We're like raccoons. It's like if it has calories, we can survive, and that's part of the reason probably why our species succeeded so well historically. But anything we do, I think that helps us to eat intentionally is going to make a difference in our lives.
Yeah, we're wonderfully made.
Do you think that, because the diet stuff is like all over the place, so obviously it seems to be a struggle for us as a human person. So is it as a lack of kind of understanding what's in food? Is it just a lack of discipline? Is it both? I mean, what do you think the major issue is?
Amen. Well, we struggle with anything where our instincts interact with our free will. And let's look at the sins that you see. It's all that. It's fear. It's, our urges, our lower desires. So I think we just struggle to make good decisions because so much of this decision is tied up in our instincts. And so this is where I think making a reasonable plan, and then I think being patient with ourselves and gentle with ourselves as we try to implement that plan. Thank you for listening to Becoming Gift. You can catch the show live every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Eastern on Ave Maria Radio. You can also find my long-form podcasts, discussions, and presentations on the Physically Spiritual podcast. Subscribe to my Substack at becominggift.com to find more from me, and don't forget to like and subscribe.